well. So that's obviously going to be some opportunity that we have started to investigate. Also looking at maybe harmonizing some of our submission processes around the common packages that are going through the gateway, right? Right, perhaps as an opportunity there. ECTD represents a international harmonized. We've got module 1, which is regional. Are there other opportunities? Is there ways that we can look at closer collaborations and points of convergence? And of course, looking at other opportunities both in the pre as well as the post market. And I would like to note these are considered pre-decisional and exploratory, since they just came from my head a couple of days ago, so I don't want to commit to anything. So that's pretty much it. We'll open the floor to questions.
Thank you, Michael and Vikesh. So I think it's an initiative that both agencies are quite proud of, and it's a good example of what, you know, when of a good success under RCC, and when two regulatory authorities want to work together, leveraging international standards and expertise on both sides. I think that's that works well, and the proof is in the pudding, I guess.
Robert, you had a question?
Yeah, I did have one question. I'd like to congratulate the group basically on how they've been able to move this forward very, very quickly, and that's great. And, you know, I'm sure all industry is actually looking forward to is looking forward to the September 27th date to hopefully implement this. Has any consideration been given, Vic, to actually including adverse drug reaction reporting also?
Yeah, so very good question. I think one of the things that we've realized as well, because we started down this path a couple years ago in terms of just from concept to now through to implementation. The adverse event electronic reporting paradigm in Health Canada has been behind about a decade, so we've been trying to play catch up in that past decade. So certainly there are things that are happening within the electronic reporting sort of stream of things within Health Canada that we've recognized there has to be a point of convergence for. So so there are two different projects happening right now in Health Canada: the Common Electronic Submission Gateway project for market authorization for ECTDs, and then the electronic reporting project, which is happening in Health Canada for specifically for adverse event reporting for drugs. But certainly, I think there is going to be a plan for convergence once both have been established. But you know, I don't think I think the thought was we didn't want to throw a dependency when it wasn't clear, you know, where things would go. I'd mentioned at the GERA call yesterday when we were discussing with our industry colleagues, when we had initially looked at this project and sort of keeping the momentum going through the negotiation of the agreement and the policy framework we had to put into place and the financial stuff. We actually had established a different path to keep industry excited about this project, not knowing what, you know, when that would come to fruition. I think now we finally, and you know, now that all that has been done and sort of completed, signed off, finances have been transferred, or sorry, funding has been transferred. We now have a path that's actually a lot more aggressive than we had originally anticipated. So I think now we're going to start thinking about, okay, let's just make sure that we're syncing up both the adverse event area as well as what we're doing over here, right? But I can emphasize that there will be a point of convergence. Yeah.
I would imagine that once a few things are worked out within Health Canada's infrastructure, we will be receiving Health Canada's adverse event reporting electronically. We're receiving 700+ thousand submission transactions per annum for our AIRS program, biologics and drugs, another 500+ thousand submission transactions for our medical device reporting system, and all of these, because they're standards based and utilizing the same certificate, can be sent in another submission easily, almost simultaneously, but not simultaneously, to our colleagues in Canada. It's
Yeah.
a prime low-hanging fruit that our industry colleagues, I would imagine, would want to transition that over quite quickly.
Yeah, and that's one of the fortunate things about Health Canada being involved or having been involved in ICH, because part of ICH and the multidisciplinary working groups is developing data standards for electronic activities and submissions, including ECTD, which is what we're going to be putting into place, and then ICSRs, which is individual case safety reports, which is what the FDA has implemented both for devices as well as drugs, and we've been in step as well. So now this common pipe becomes a point of convergence for those standards as well, right? So if you think long-term, right? Global safety, harmonized inventory of adverse event, maybe that becomes a reality, right? So.
Please?
Yes? Okay. Hello, how are you? Yes? No.
You mentioned the next possible step in terms of this whole project, because the gateway is the pipe, so the contents of the pipe. Is that going to be like another initiative to look at the contents themselves? Where can we harmonize, for instance, with respect to submissions? Or is that going to be a sub-initiative, or however, mechanism of moving forward?
That is to be determined, but from a technological standpoint, it will be very easy to execute because all it would require is 4 hours work on my team's behalf to add that to Health Canada's section of the pull-down list for the web trader and establish some routing IDs. So everything becomes possible. It becomes what is the political will.
Yeah, and what's a low-hanging fruit
That is
as
the only
well.
thing that will stop it.
Yeah, and right now I just broached the medical device problem reporting because it's something that we've been looking at from a departmental perspective. Now, the one thing that RCC, at least from my point of view, from having that direct line into the right people as opposed to going through and trying to figure out who's who and what CEDAR is versus CBER versus CDRH versus CVMSC. I know them all now, right? So, but been able to see some of the utilities that have already been developed around that same problem. And I'm like, well, wait a second, there's something that we can leverage here. And they've actually been at this for the last 7+ years. So it's not like we have to, redo the same or go through the same pain as, so I appreciate Michael going through that pain. So now we can leverage that from that, right? So.
Yeah, I think from an, and I'm going to just say IT perspective, like from the
Have to put it that way right
Yeah.
now.
from the IT perspective, absolutely. I think it's kind of like, where do we start? Like, is there a lead? Or is it just part of, in the case, for instance, of, well, both Canada and the U.S., is it really like Health Canada regulators and and FDA regulators that the conversation has to be with respect to what the content of submissions
Yeah,
is?
there has to be a discussion.
Like the
yeah.
regional requirements type of thing,
Yeah.
Okay.
There
Definitely.
has to be that discussion, and
Yep.
we've already placed Vic in contact with the appropriate parties.
Yeah.
Craig? Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am.
Jean Skotnicki with the Animal Health Institute, the Canadian Animal Health Institute. And just a question, is there any plan to extend this type of work to the veterinary drug area? Both, which come under FDA and Health Canada both.
I was just sitting on the
respectively.
steps
with
And there is a
Vic.
DICH process as
I,
well.
I would imagine
Yeah.
that
It's-
again, just like Vic has said, it depends on the discussion between the FDA regulators, because presently CVM is already online with the gateway. They are utilizing it fully electronically. They're receiving all their products and information in that manner, and with a due for moving forward to even a greater presence is fully electronic. So it becomes a discussion on what do you want to leverage or what do you want to build within the Health Canada end of this infrastructure piece for submissions acceptance, because the possibility and the capability is already present and
Yeah.
being leveraged.
Yeah, and it's as we had mentioned, it's a convergence in needs and stakeholder needs, both internal as well as external and global across other regulators. To your point, I was sitting on the steps of the Canadian Embassy with the Director General for Veterinary Drugs, for which there's another RCC initiative for simultaneous filing of submissions, and we just sort of have that conversation now. Like, well, what we're doing here is we take a harmonized standard and we're leveraging the same IT infrastructure, and then starting to look at commonalities across the process. Well, now you've got an area that's already established a common process to some extent, and well, wait a second, is there now an opportunity here to start including some common tools, right? So, but these are the discussions that need to happen, right? And the possibilities that are possible given the fact that the tools are available.
I'm cognizant of time, so I
Sure.
know that we have 2 more questions. You
Okay.
have the mic, so.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Christina from Abbott Nutrition. I basically had the same question, more in regards to nutrition products, specifically infant formula filings. I actually work with filings. I submit them to FDA, and then work with my colleagues in Montreal to submit them in Health Canada. And it is so difficult in the sense of the timing is different, the information is slightly different, and I realize that there's definitely areas for improvement in the process as well. However, if there is anything that you guys could recommend as far as where from industry, where we could, from the nutrition product industry, where we can try and work together with our Canadian colleagues and FDA to not only build a process that is useful for both governments and industry, but then as well as building onto a lovely electronic system.
I would say that building a viable relationship with the FDA and Health Canada colleagues to hash it out would be your next step, because CIFSAN has just come online fully with the gateway and will be receiving a much larger burden of submissions through this interface. So their capability for food safety and nutrition at FDA has just truly launched this year. And I would imagine that they'd be very interested in a viable discussion between all parties.
No.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, and I think just listening to the discussions this morning, I think RCC is the right starting point to have that discussion, right?
Craig, they're getting you the mic. They're saying, I have to, while he's waiting for the mic, say that he has been an invaluable partner in this process.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So just a comment on the point of collaboration. And sometimes when we look at, and we hear all the stories about regulatory cooperation, and sometimes we look at the direct path. So the direct path is, oh, we have to harmonize regulations, we have to harmonize the processes and work the same way right away. And in some cases that works, and in some cases there's an indirect path like this, where you create a common IT pipe and you start funneling information and you say, we're exchanging information in the same way. And then you start to say, well, why don't we have a common IT platform on the other end so that you're sharing the same pool of data. And then from there, just as Vic mentioned, there's already examples of organic partnership and collaboration between Health Canada and FDA, where they just call each other and talk to each other. So by having common platforms, you actually facilitate those kinds of activities where the regulators want to work together. You don't have to force them. So earlier when we were talking about, and people were asking questions about sustainability, if you have to force it, you're not going to get sustainability. If it's something that's natural, it's organic, you provide value, that will be naturally sustainable, and it won't be something that you have to force. So I think this is just the start of something, and it's a platform that we can actually build some pretty interesting things on.
Thank you.
That's
I just wanted to add
Good concluding
one-
remarks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
One item to this is in the not forcing. The reason that we've been successful is since the RCC started and beforehand, Vic and I have had a weekly business call to make this work. And we've worked out all our issues and problems as a team, a corporate effort between individuals in his group and my group to make this work. And that is really what we're talking about here, because if you want to move the world forward, that's what you have to do.
And
Thank
actually,
you, guys. Let's
Thank you.
we could have you. Good. Please. So we're going to move over to the over-the-counter therapeutic products, common monographs. Okay, if you would.
Hi,
Thank
everyone.
you.
So I'm feeling that it's really hot in this room and it's dark in this room and it's like really conducive to napping, but not so conducive to a meeting. So if everyone will like just humor me for like 2 minutes, I want everyone to get up for a minute, take a little stretch, stretch your arms, move around, take a few deep breaths, because I'm feeling hot, and see, we're Health Canada. We're trying to get people moving, get healthy, so stretch, take a minute, get some energy. But with that, yeah, take your jackets off, your sweaters, just stay decent. Pardon me? I do, yes. Is it? Okay. And I'm told that thank you everyone for humoring me on that. So I'm told our presentation's coming up. And I guess I do the forward arrow? No, it's probably the middle one. Yeah, no, first one then I guess. There we go.
Yes.
So I'm here with my colleague Steve Ada, and I guess we've decided, just given that it's not the longest presentation, I'll talk, so you get to listen to me. But Steve's here to answer questions, and we'll try to get through this relatively quickly. So just a little bit of overview. I'm not going to spend time there. Just want to talk a little bit about this initiative. So it's the common over-the-counter, common monograph elements for over-the-counter drugs. And basically we were looking at what can we do to try to ensure that we're starting to align monographs for over-the-counter products, looking at common indications, common conditions of use, directions, and warnings. And basically what areas are good for alignment, what areas perhaps may not be as useful. So I kind of get into it a bit later, but you'll be familiar with I believe it was very early January on the U.S. Federal Register, was it very end of December? I can't remember.
January.
It was early January in the U.S. Federal Register. It was announced that we're working together on a common monograph for antihistamines for common cough and cold. So that's sort of our first pilot. So we've been working on that, and I guess I'm going to go to the next slide, and sort of a little bit different from what you heard from the previous presentation. We sort of started this discussion in January of 2012 when we found out there was this new initiative called the RCC. And to be fair, I think we've had lots of, Health Canada and FDA have had lots of good interactions in the past, but I think that was a lot more on the prescription side of things. And so I think it's fair to say on the OTC side, there really hadn't been a whole lot of connection. So this certainly was a great opportunity, but we really were starting on the OTC side of things from sort of the ground up. So we spent a lot of time sort of in our first step, which was scope and governance. And it was really literally, we were doing weekly conference calls, and it was really like, what do you guys do? What do you guys do in your jurisdiction for over-the-counter drugs? What do we do? And so just to break it down for those of you who may or may not know, we do have slightly different systems, obviously. In Canada, we sort of have two types of approaches, and I think they're not so substantially different, but we do have we've got sort of what are called our older drugs, our Division I drugs, if you're familiar with the food and drug regulations. I don't want to get into it because it's not that interesting, but those drugs generally have a monograph or a labeling standard or sort of an abbreviated review depending on the type of submission that it is. And then we've got something that are called new drugs under Division 8, and those definitely have a much higher level of review. Within the FDA, they also do have sort of a two-pronged approach, which is you either have your monograph, which is no pre-market assessment. So that is a key difference, no pre-market assessment for the monographs in the US. And then they also have the new drug application, which does have some pre-market review. So that gives you a sense. We were sort of just sitting down trying to figure out each other's processes. And so we spent a lot of time just on the sort of laying the groundwork, figuring out what the differences are, where the similarities are, and what things we could work on that would sort of give us a product that would allow us to move forward with an initiative and then going forward after that. So the second step was to work out a monograph. And one of the things, of course, that was a challenge because in the Canadian system, the monograph is a guidance document. So it's basically, let's take our regulations, see what we can do to apply those regulations, put together a guidance document. And so it's sort of, you put out the document, you get some comments, and then you finalize it. The US, of course, the monograph are rules-based. So it's a regulatory process. It's much more, it's a much longer process. It's more structured. So part of what we had to do is sort of, look at all the monographs that were out there and which ones were potentially at a point of being able to be revised or ones that were potentially ready to be in a certain stage. So I think we sort of looked at if it was a proposed rule stage, that would be something that would have been applicable and we could kind of get finalized within sort of the time period of the initial RCC. Anything that was sort of advance notice of public advanced rulemaking was going to be too far, wasn't far enough along in the process. We couldn't do it, and anything that already had a final monograph wasn't going to work. So we did have sort of, this whole sort of puzzle that we had to work out, like what is going to actually give us a monograph that we can put out collectively in the time frame that's going to meet. So that's sort of one of the reasons why we ended up with the one that we ended up. And then moving into the third step, obviously, we're now working on, we have actually developed and found a common monograph. And of course, we had to do a lot of, looking at each other's data, seeing what was out there, trying to just determine that we were kind of on the same page and, willing to work together and able to sort of come out with something that was actually going to be meaningful for you, the regulated industry. And then sort of the fourth step is actually to have the public process for the pilot monograph. So as I mentioned, we've already announced that. So where we're at, as we mentioned, we've shared our documents. We do have, we've put together the common monograph. So I guess I need to be clear, it's 2 documents, one for each country, but ultimately what those documents will allow you to do would be to have one monograph that could be used in both jurisdictions. So that means, same indications, same uses, and more or less the same language. There's a few differences here and there, but nothing that would stop you from essentially having one label that you could share across the border without any, substantial, that you could basically ship across the border as needed, and there wouldn't be anybody stopping you from doing that because you'd be meeting both jurisdictions' needs. So the U.S. has a proposed rulemaking is currently in clearance stage, and Health Canada, we have our draft guidance document that's ready and essentially awaiting waiting approvals. So, our goal, again, short term, was to sort of, how can we publish a proposed draft document that will have aligned elements, and then long term, what can we do that would be more sustainable going forward? So we're certainly, I would say we're looking for suggestions and comments from you folk to give us some ideas on what it is that we might want to be doing for another stage, or what things would be useful for you. Because we've talked about that, and we've said, if we're doing something that's not useful for the stakeholders, then there's probably no point us doing it. So we have to make sure that we get your input. It doesn't mean we can necessarily do everything you suggest, but we can certainly try. So that's really why we're here today and what we're looking for. So timing-wise, we want to make sure that we're going to get both the documents out at the same time, and then moving forward, what our plan is to actually work collectively on any comments that come in so that we actually have a final document that will be the same, that will be consistent, and that would have a sort of life cycle moving forward. So if there's amendments that need to be made, those would be made collectively as well. There's no point doing something today and then in 5 years' time not being in the same place again. So just to give you a little bit of lessons learned, some of the discussion that we've had a little bit earlier was regulatory versus policy. That does change things. The Canadian system, the monograph, is a policy guidance document. There's more flexibility to make changes. With the rules-based process that the FDA follows, it does take longer to do things. So obviously we're making sure that we're working as well as we can within the regulatory system that we have, and that's why we determined that this monograph is going to be a good one, and we'll continue to try to find things that are going to work for both of us. Obviously, external communications, making sure that we get connected with stakeholders. These types of events are really good because they really help us understand sort of, are we meeting the needs and what do you need from us? Life cycle approach, again, sort of looking at, first of all, making sure the documents sort of stay relevant and stay connected, but also, is there some kind of governance structure that we need to have in place to ensure that we sort of have, a forward plan that would be sort of meeting the needs of stakeholders, but also, maybe having something more systemic in place so we can be sure that 2, 3, 4 years from now, we're still working collectively, that we haven't lost the sort of knowledge that and expertise that we've gained, that we can keep building on it. So that's what we're trying to work forward on, and obviously looking for suggestions on as well. Implementation strategy, again, noticing that there are differences between our regulatory systems, and we're trying to align where we can. But, when it comes down to regulatory changes or legislative changes, that's not easy. And we heard that this morning as well. So catalyst for further alignment, continuing to actively participate. As I mentioned, we started off with weekly calls. We've had 2 face-to-face meetings, one in Ottawa, one in Washington, and then a couple of events here and there. We continue to have conference calls every 2 weeks. So we are committed to continuing to work on this, and I think we've had some really great experience working with both regulators. And I think that's sort of it. I think I've hit most of the other points, so I think I'm just going to leave it at that. I didn't want to make the presentation too long, and open up for questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes.
Hi, Dan Karavich, GSK. As far as getting these documents through clearance, we have OMB here. Is there any special provisions to get these documents through ORP and through Cedar Management and OMB in a timely manner? Because right now, there is pretty much no OTC documents coming out of OMB. Okay, sure.
As far as,
meeting not left OMB, right? Yeah.
just to try to answer your question from our perspective, we haven't seen anything different in the process. However, so far, the clearance has gone really well from FDA side. So, I think we're doing quite well in terms of our timeline, but the question as it gets further up, what happens to it, I'm not sure.
Just a thought also, I'd like to add something to this. One way you could expedite this if this is a successful campaign on both parties' part is talk to your trade associations and see after they go through TFM, try to direct final rule. You could save us all several years to implement.
Yeah, there's no doubt. The issue is that, at least with FDA, we're stuck with a very set process right now. This is one of the things we had to deal with early on. There was an agreement between Health Canada and FDA that we would release our documents at the same time, both draft and final. And it's really being driven by the FDA process, which is a very much more set in place process. And one of the things that for the future we would like to look at, and I don't know how easy it's going to be to change it, would be the option of either speeding the process up or changing the process somehow to make it more expeditious.
Well, the third option here is, again, having some experience here with this is, think of a hybrid situation like a TEA approach. I'm not saying TEA approach works, it doesn't
Right.
work, but a hybrid way of getting through rulemaking without having to go through the rigors of three sessions to get it out there, which, I mean, I worked on Alexa's final rule for 12 years and that's still not out there, so.
But listen, I've got stuff in clearance right now that's been sitting there forever, so
All right, that's
I
my comments
understand
accordingly,
exactly
right.
what you're saying.
Right.
Things that are outside of my hands that are elsewhere and due to other priorities and other things I don't even know, stuff just isn't moving as quickly as we'd like. So I definitely understand your feeling, because I have the same one.
Robert White, Consumer Health Products Canada. Thank you very much for that update. You did ask whether we had some opinions and basically of where you could go in the future, and we heard this morning basically at the plenary sessions we will have the opportunity to input into the system basically where you're looking for future well, future
Makings?
things for the Common Monograph Project.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. Got stuck there for a sec. And what we were thinking of was this. I mean, now that Health Canada and FDA has had a good opportunity basically to observe each other's processes, is there a way instead of actually doing a monograph and getting an output perhaps of one monograph every 2 years, which industry finds to be not only slow and cumbersome, but it's actually a lot of time and effort goes into these things too, especially FDA where you have to go through a whole rulemaking system. How about actually thinking about actually looking at the processes that are involved in submission review, OTC submission review, both in Canada and the U.S. For example, in the U.S., you have a final final monograph process where you can go directly to market. In Canada, we don't have that process right now. But the thing is, the standards of evidence that are being looked at, they're pre-cleared information. Is there a way, in fact, looking at whether processes can be aligned? Also in Canada, as Lisa was talking about a little bit earlier, we have a DIN process, which means it is not just something that's a final monograph or something that's a new drug application, but there's an intermediate type step basically where there can be things that are outside the monograph that are still reviewed. So there may be some opportunities basically to look at aligning of processes and learning from that to find out basically what is the way in fact that you can get market access on both sides of the border using the best lessons that each country basically has already developed.
Yeah. So as a group, we've done that. We've actually discussed it and maybe what we could do in the future. But I think I'm going to refer to the previous speakers who mentioned political will. There's got to be that drive elsewhere to be able to move it forward. I think we'd certainly support it because it's, the gentleman from GSK just mentioned and what I just said is that moving stuff forward for us is really difficult and we would like to see a change to the process. But what that change would be and the support for it and all that, I just don't know. But we're open to it.
Thank you.
Hi, Jason Royce with the Consumer Healthcare Products Association. And I just wanted to ask about, Lisa, you mentioned about under your lessons learned there, of addressing industry requests for increased participation. And I think Bob Carberry mentioned this morning that maybe some themed presentations on some of the initiatives were planned. And I didn't know if this initiative had one coming up in the future, or if there's something that maybe the trade associations could help out with getting this sort of thing together, because I think the more the people know, the better off everybody will be.
Ideas and what can we do moving forward. So I'm not sure that we have anything concrete. We certainly don't have any plans right now for a session. That doesn't mean that won't happen coming out of sort of what happens in the next 2 days. So I think, we're certainly, obviously, there's going to be consultations requested over the summer, but I can't speak to anything more specific because I don't know anything right now.
Hi, Beth Turk, Johnson & Johnson. If I understood the comment, the monographs that we would look at finding common ground are those that are still in the review phase. So those that are already final are, really aren't applicable for this process, or we'd have to find out another way. Did I understand that correctly?
Not quite. So the initiative, the RCC was signed in December of 2011, and it was handed to us in January of 2012 with a 2-year timeline from January. So our concern at the time was picking something that was going to be not really complex, something that was a little bit further along where we had a little bit of background so we could move it forward easier in order to try to match that timeline. I think that you should make suggestions that will work for you, and we'll see what we can do with them. So I wouldn't put any limits on anything right now. I just think that was the limit we had for this particular initiative. And one of the things in the future that may come out of this is that we may end up discussing that a 2-year timeline for some of the more complex issues that we may try to harmonize may be a problem. And maybe it's not, I just don't know. From this initiative, a lot of our time was spent trying to get to know each other and how things worked. And that took some time out. Once we move into the next initiative, I think we'll be ready to hit it a lot quicker. So it might be that we can tackle something that already is there, but we want to try to harmonize it a little better. So I just don't know. I would make suggestions and see where it goes.
Yeah. And then just to echo what Bob White just said, his comment, and actually to build on the comment that Bob Carberry had this morning, is really looking for opportunities, either whether it's mutual recognition or memorandums of understanding for reviews, because you guys are looking at the same data, and it seems such a shame of resources and time not to be able to respect and those processes. I think FDA and Health Canada have complementary systems, processes to clear products. So we should try to take advantage of those, but understand there might be some legislation involved. So
Yeah.
We'll have to work on that. Yeah, thank you.
Do we have other questions? I think that's, well, thank you very much. Thank you for a very, very successful initiative. Thank you. Now, our third initiative for this afternoon is the GMP, the Good Manufacturing Practice Compliance.
Can I just do it from here?
What?
Can I just do it from here?
No, please come in the front. So we have Becenti and what's his name?
Carmelo Rosa.
I always want to call you Rosario. I don't know why. So
I'll say it okay.
Do a joint presentation. Okay. Yeah, it's more of a dialogue, less of a presentation.
yes, absolutely.
So, good manufacturing practice. So I'm Becenti Ghosh. You will see the name of Robin Chiponsky on the deck. Robin Chiponsky just took over as the new Director General of the Inspectorate. Oh, it is my name. Oh, somebody changed that. The version I had Robin's name on it.
Anyway, I take the opportunity of sharing the information that we have a new DG for the Inspectorate for the Health Products and Food Branch, and her name is Robin Cheponski. So, Carmelo and we have been working together since May 2012 when it was first announced. Carmelo was working more directly with my previous DG, Diana Douthwaite. I came on board a little bit later, and things started moving as soon as I came on board. So, do you have the clicker? Okay. So it's the same format for the slide deck. So I'll skip that. So the intent behind this particular initiative under the RCC was to truly avoid any duplicative inspections in each other's jurisdictions. So if you are doing GMP inspections and we're doing them ourselves, and then FDA comes and does that, so how do you avoid doing those duplicated inspections? So the milestones that we wanted to actually hit were exchange of list of sites for common interest. So we had to start somewhere, and the starting point was to see if we can exchange inspection reports, whether their inspection reports are almost the same as ours, where are the gaps, how do they write their observations, how do we write our observations. So it was more of a learning exercise when we started. And then we exchanged inspection plans, decided on which sites we would actually inspect, and then the conduct of the observational inspections, see how FDA conducts inspections, how we conduct our inspections. So we have to actually go through the exercise of conducting inspections. And then in the future, there is this hope that we will have a joint GMP database and end up doing joint inspections. So that's the actual intent of the initiative. So we did start doing exchange the inspection reports last fall. It was quite an elaborate process because although on the surface it might seem that we are quite similar because these are GMP inspections, and a GMP inspection is a GMP inspection. But when we started doing the exercise of actually comparing our processes, we did find that there are differences. So those differences are what we needed to actually clarify so that we could move forward. And then we had to actually exchange the lists of facilities. And I'm going to turn over to the presentation to Carmelo because we decided that we would start small. Instead of starting with the most complex kind of manufacturing facilities or complex kind of activities, we thought we would take the lowest risk, which is the OTCs, and compare our processes, compare our inspection, and then move forward with doing inspections of more complex facilities. So Carmelo, if you want to jump in there.
Yes, certainly. As mentioned by my colleague, one of the primary objective is to see where we were, to establish sort of a baseline as to when we compare Health Canada's approaches during inspection, Health Canada's report content, Health Canada's regulation that we can compare with the U.S. to see what are those specific differences and similarities that we can build on. When we started the discussion in 2012, OTC seemed like the perfect scenario to go to because the lower risk, but also because there appears to be a better understanding in terms of there's a monograph in both countries, and there's a lot of discussions in terms of not only with Health Canada but with the rest of the world of how we regulate OTC products. So we, at this point, what we've been doing is exchanging inspection reports and taking a good look at the content. I heard a few minutes ago in other presentations that the content is actually a key component for us because we could have the structure, we could have the IT system, but evaluating the content is key because that's what we base our decisions on. So we have been exchanging inspection reports. We've recently had an observational inspection, and you heard my colleague mention observation and then perhaps in the future joint inspections because we see them different. The observation is that opportunity to learn what each other does in terms of the scope of their regulatory framework versus a joint inspection. There's a more collaborative effort. There's a common understanding of the process, and there's a common understanding as well as the outcome and what are the next steps. And an example of that, if you look at FDA's joint inspection program as part of the API program that we have with international regulators, is a bit different to what we're trying to accomplish here in this program. So at this point, we have conducted observational inspections in Canada, and as we speak, the reports are being written, and we're still in the process of receiving the feedback of those reports in terms of the outcome of the inspection. There's a form that has to be completed as to the process that went through as part of that observational inspection. So there was one inspection conducted where FDA was the observer, and then there was another inspection where FDA was actually conducting the inspection, and Canada was the observing agency. As we speak, there's a planning process for the next inspections to be occurring in the U.S., where we're using the same framework, where one inspection will be observational from Canada and one will be performed by the U.S. So we're looking forward to that, those inspections that are ongoing. Again, this is a baseline. This is just the beginning. When you look at the size of perhaps the FDA, there's hundreds and hundreds of inspectors. So to reach a conclusion based on 2 or 4 inspections may not be the right way, but again, it gives us information that we can start working on and start building that relationship that we're all seeking.
Let me just jump in there. In order to arrive at actually selecting a site and actually going in and doing an inspection, it took a lot of time and effort to even develop the indicators. So you could go and do an inspection, but you still need to actually determine how you would assess the success of those inspections. So when you see that bullet there, list of indicators, it took us a long time to do something which is close to what you would do if you were auditing something. So that template that Carmelo referred to, that's the template that the inspectors are actually filling in, the ones who actually did the inspections and the ones who observed. So you'll have 4 inspections done at the end of this exercise, where 2 on Canadian soil, 2 on the US soil, 2 observed by us and 2 observed by the US. So, and then we will sit down with those assessment reports and see the conclusions that each one of those inspectors has actually drawn.
Okay.
That'll give us not a huge data set, but at least 4 to begin with, to see, are there significant differences? Even how you make an observation, how do you write an observation? So the content which Carmelo was talking about, are we brief? Are they more explicit when they make their observations? So that's where the learning will actually happen once we finished with all the 4 inspections.
That list of indicators is a key aspect of this process, because you have the roles and responsibilities of every participant. One of the, and this is just an interesting story of the process, initially, because Health Canada has a sort of a different structure, they have a program where, as part of the observational inspection, they would have a QA person that would participate there and observe actually the process independently to the observing participant. That, for while we were having our discussion, we wanted that to be removed, because we were seeing it from an independent. We wanted the investigators, the inspectors, the people doing the inspection. So it was an interesting discussion going back and forth, and we actually resolved doing a briefing prior to the inspection and then letting the inspection to go as independent as possible. So it's been a very nice journey in this process with Health Canada. Yeah, one of the ongoing alignments is the exchange of major regulatory actions. And I think one thing that we did not point out in the previous slide was that because we operate under different frameworks, one thing that we are learning as we're speaking and interaction is more about the regulatory compliance aspects of Health Canada's process. See, it's known that in the U.S. we issue warning letters for non-compliant firms, import alerts. We issue consent decrees, so we. It sounds like bad, but that's our compliance regulatory framework and tools that we have. And as we're speaking, we're learning more about the tools that Health Canada has to ensure that non-compliant firms come into that compliant stage that we all look forward to. So one of the biggest hurdles that we've had in the process is that during the exchange of information, there's laws in the U.S. that prevent us from sharing certain type of information, trade secret, private information. So we're trying to overcome some of those hurdles through different processes. Historically, Health Canada has gone directly to the company to obtain a copy of the reports because the process may be a bit complicated in terms of if the investigation is still open or there's other aspects to it that makes it a bit challenging for the FDA to release those reports at that stage. So we're looking for alternatives and options to see how we continue to overcome some of these hurdles in the process. And as you know, FDA recently approved a new legislation in July of last year, the FDAIA, which gives us the opportunity to be able to exchange some more information. So we're exchanging inspection schedules. We have monthly telecons. I just want to point out, it seems like monthly is a long time. I think I talk to Bazanti more than many of my friends. So we are on the phone almost on a weekly basis, bi-weekly, when there's an issue that we need to discuss. We're not waiting for that particular call of once a month to engage with Health Canada and have our discussions. To follow up on outstanding inspection reports, again, we have this type of communication, and to share inspection information when an inspection report is not available, meaning that if in the FDA we had a particular incident with a company in City A, and we are looking at seeing if there's a pattern of nonconformance in other facilities under the same corporation, that report because it's still under evaluation, is not released at that point because it's considered an open case. So what we've been working with Health Canada is seeing, okay, they need the information. Can we have an inspection briefing? Can we get together with some of the inspectors that were at the facility that they have a particular interest in? Because we are sensitive to the need of that information from our colleagues from Canada. So I'm mentioning this because it seems a simple process, but because there's some challenges that we need to overcome, we've been working around some of these hurdles, and I think it's been working well.
I'm sure when we open the floor for questions, some of you folks will talk about that, because I'm sure the Canadian industry has already given us that feedback as to how to address that particular gap. So next steps. On my second slide, I think I had shown 2 bullets that the ultimate goal is to have a joint database and a joint inspection scheme, but it'll be a phased approach. It'll be a learning approach. So the idea is that for the time being, we will continue to exchange the inspection reports and data, and any kind of regulatory actions that the FDA is taking, which I think that will impact Health Canada, they do try and advise us beforehand and share that information. Once we finish these 4 observational inspections, we will have a dialogue again to see whether we expand the scope of these inspections. Do we now move on to maybe a higher risk group of activities, or do we continue to do the OTCs and gather a little bit more information? That will come only after we analyze the 4 inspection reports. The biggest hurdle that Health Canada has actually faced and continues to face in the area of GMP inspections and establishment licensing is IT, lack of IT. And you heard the presentation from Vikesh and Michael, and that we are starting, and we're starting with successes in the ECTD and the drug submissions area. But I have been speaking to Vikesh to see if we can even somehow leverage that for our GMP and establishment licenses, because when we ask FDA for information and the files are really big, they don't come through the email. And we do not have a way of getting that information. Something as simple as that we have to find solutions for those as well. And then mitigating is Vikesh in the room?
No,
He's not.
Vikesh,
So
yeah.
that's the bullet that Vikesh put in there because he's the one who's leading that, trying and leveraging the effort that he's responsible for with PAHO, so that we can actually have a joint secure model and a platform for exchange of information. Maybe you have a little bit more info on that.
No,
Susie,
it's Lou and I.
Yeah.
Okay, it's Lou and you? Okay. But the issue is that we have IT challenges and that we are trying to find solutions, bits and pieces from here and there. UDRA GMP, we do have access to that. We have, Beth was kind enough to do a training session for Health Canada employees on the Comstat database. She learned through that exercise that she was under the impression that we see exactly what she sees. And for her, it was an eye-opener that we don't see the same thing. So there are small little things that we have learned through this exchange which were not stated objectives, but there are so many gains for my ability to pick up the phone and just talk to Carmelo when I have issues. So even those are huge advantages. Beth, if you wanted to.
Is there the mic for Beth? There, no, there you go, Beth.
Yeah, I'm Beth Philby with FDA, working with Carmelo and Basanti under RCC. As we've been mentioning, that the IT platform has been a major issue, not only for this, but just with our collaboration efforts in general. So I really liked the comment that once there is a common platform, whatever that platform is and whatever its goal is or whatever its usage is, that breeds further collaboration and harmonization. So we're on the other side of that, where we're working on a level of alignment, harmonization, and work sharing where we're struggling with the IT side. So it was great to hear, again, the success with the CSG, and as mentioned in this last slide, as you know, it seems like just a couple little bullets, but the PAHO system, we've actually working on the work group with Vic at Health Canada to get this going. It has a lot of promise to solve some of the issues that we've been struggling with. That's, you know, lots of emails back and forth, no version control. I mean, we're talking sites everywhere and addresses. We don't have a common identifier. We have, you know, all these numerous issues that something as simple as just, hey, we can go and edit the same document can solve. So one effort breeds another, and then we'll continue to progress in that area.
And another point I also wanted to briefly mention is so the people in the room have an understanding. FDA operates, we have the international group which is responsible for all foreign inspection. That would be basically the foreign inspections, including Canada. But when it comes to a facility in the U.S., that's handled by our domestic group, whereas if there's an inspection request of a facility that is supplying products to Canada, we have to go through a sort of a different process, and we're working on that. We understand that as we collaborate and engage more with our partners, we have to address those issues. So the FDA is working and looking at ways of enhancing that process and facilitating, so the information that is available could be rapidly accessible or available to our international partners.
So since you folks are in the enviable or unenviable position of being regulated by both of us, the FDA and Health Canada, so we would like you to tell us if there are suggestions of how we could actually improve this initiative, or anything else that we can do in order to engage you, get your feedback. Health Canada has been going to the bilateral industry association meetings that we have. That's where we have been updating on the RCC progress. I have recently had the pleasure of meeting a couple of you in Canada separately because of a very specific issue with the drug establishment licenses and access to foreign site information. And I have been providing the RCC update there as well. So this is your opportunity to give us your questions and your suggestions and your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, we have many questions. Please.
Here's the mic.
Hi there. My name is Murray Rowe, Dr. Ghosh. We've spoken before. Could you talk a little bit about, in Canada, there's new legislation or an amendment to the Food and Drug Act relating to good manufacturing practices, but specifically to active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturers. And, you know, I've read the amendments, and I'm still learning an awful lot there. But is there any thought or discussion with the FDA that they've done an enormous amount of inspections abroad? In chatting with my colleague from Dun & Bradstreet here, I think it was something like 160,000 licensed establishments in China alone. So from a safety perspective, getting that information is really important to Canadians, and if it's bilateral, important to the U.S. Could we maybe just hear a little bit of feedback on thoughts of the sharing of API data, and kind of, is that short, medium, and long term, or kind of, is there political will to this discussion? I just at a high level, not at a minute level.
Let me take a first shot at that question. Yeah, when we are interacting and sharing inspectional report, we don't have a limit in terms of we can only give you OTC or finished dose or API. If our colleagues make a request on an API site that we've been to in China, India, or around the world, we use the same process. So we make no sort of distinction in that regard. So that's one positive of this. The other thing is that we have the API program that we have with, where EMA and other regulators are involved. One of the important aspects of that program is that we share sites of common interest. We coordinate, we interact in terms of where are you going and where am I going? Can we do a joint inspection, or could you do that inspection and so forth? So there is a lot of discussion among regulators on API. We're just looking forward to what's going to happen in Canada with that new legislation, learning more about their industry there, how many sites they have, and how we could continue to engage. But at this point, when we come to the table with Health Canada, we don't have ties in terms of, well, we're going to only look at this industry if you ask for an inspection report. Another aspect is that we're participating on common international trainings. Give you an example. Last year in Washington, D.C., here where we're at, we had a training program. It was called API, Sterile API program. This was an expert level of experts within different PICS members. Canada and others were at that training. There was a biotech, API biotech training. So we're even participating in international trainings to make sure that we're sharing that expectation in terms of technical expectation in different areas.
If I may just add that the API regulations are expected to come into force fall of 2013. So the first year will be just a registration. So it will be a list of establishments, because currently what we need to do with the coming into force of the regulations to get a sense of how big is our industry. Because at this point in time, even though we did a survey, we don't really know how big is our industry that we will be regulating. So the first year, with that registration scheme, it will allow us to get a sense of how big is our regulations going to impact. So the importers, Canadian importers, will have the responsibility of certifying the GMP of their source sites. So the responsibility will lie with the industry to say that I'm sourcing from a good GMP compliant source. Moving forward, it'll be a mirror of our current drug establishment licensing scheme. So I know my conversations with you before coming here were in terms of identifying and leveraging what the FDA has already done with the DUNS number. So we still have to have that conversation to see how can we actually maybe benefit from what you have already done with the FDA, and see if we can use some of that for regulating our API manufacturers as well. So I look forward to having those conversations in the future, and even I haven't actually seen the demo. So when I go back, maybe if I see the demo, I will be able to get a better understanding of how we can, and then continue to talk with Carmelo as to how they are using the DUNS number. Because like I had said, to me it was just an inventory of business, but if there is product-related information, activity-related information in that database, then when you're doing a recall, then it is useful information to have. So like Beth had said, if there is something in place somebody is using, we will absolutely make sure that we are not starting from scratch and we're trying to build off on that. So I don't know if I've answered your question. Okay.
Question on the-
Hi, Todd Breeden from Johnson & Johnson in Canada. Could you just clarify for me what the ultimate objective or outcome is going to be from this work that you're going through? Is it either that there would be mutual recognition and acceptance of each of your audits or inspections, or is it you're striving towards common system standards and data sharing between your organizations? I guess it's not clear to me which objective you're trying to achieve, or perhaps a combination of the two.
Yeah, one of the primary objectives at this point and at this stage is to, number one, get a better understanding of what both countries are doing in terms of GMP inspections. At this stage, we're learning about the regulatory framework. We're learning about how Canada performs their inspections. They're looking and seeing at the way FDA is performing inspections. There might be, of course, in the future, the opportunity for that type of leverage that we've been speaking about. There might be in the future as well the opportunity to rely on some inspections and delay some of ours. At this point, that's where we're trying to set that baseline of understanding each other's systems and processes. You heard today, one of the questions was about the API legislation. For us, it's very important. Okay, once that legislation comes into play, if they're going to be doing API inspections, to work with them and seeing that process of developing that experience in that area and how we can engage with them, because again, it is a process to be able to rely on each other's. Page 15, I believe, of that document that was signed in December. There's that paragraph. It has a sentence there about mutual reliance in terms of where we can rely on each other's work. And at this point, low-risk products is one of the target products that we're looking at, OTCs, and then work ourselves up in that process. But it's just to get a better understanding and see where we can leverage. There's been, as I recall, one inspection where we did an inspection. It resulted in an action by the FDA. We did a re-inspection, and we found some additional deficiencies. We worked with Health Canada to see if they can do that re-inspection so we won't have to go again. So there's opportunities to, again, understand, share, leverage on the work that we do.
I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to approach this almost from the opposite perspective. So it sounds as though you're taking very much of a build from the ground up type approach, understand what one another is doing so that you build confidence in one another's approaches and systems over time. If you go up to the 50,000 foot level and understand that both Health Canada and the FDA are highly developed, highly competent regulatory authorities that are leaders on a global stage, may have differences in approaches and perhaps difference in opinions, but at the end of the day, both the Canadian public and the American public are well served today by their agencies. So if your perspective is what's being done on either side of the border today is very effective and is serving the citizens well, should the question not be what are the differences that would prevent you from accepting that at face value without building it from the ground up and understanding all of those systems, and particularly as you look at low-risk products?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. There's a joint effort, there's a parallel process. We're looking at the differences at that level. For example, you heard us mention that we are looking at inspection reports. That may be one difference that we're gonna work with, because, for example, if I'm gonna use a Health Canada's inspection report, we expect some information to be there in order to make a decision, and they expect some information to be in that report in order for it to be useful. And this is the same with other regulators. So we are looking at that high level aspect and seeing where we could come to, to the point where we don't have to go and start from scratch.
Yeah. But it's almost sounding as though it's really a verification exercise. And I guess my challenge is, why would you not take it at face value once you understand how each other works, without having to re-verify? You would never look at the file again. You say, Health Canada is comfortable with this facility. We accept that, without going through a file, without ever looking at any documents related to that facility.
That's a good question, but there's too many assumptions that we're going to be making, and there's also the risk. One of the questions that we often get is the duplication or reinspection of facility of different parts of the world between regulators. Having more than one inspection is not a bad thing, and you see it based on the outcome. One of the things that we have done in this process is we've looked at FDA's inspection and we've looked at other regulators' inspections, and there, in many cases, are substantial differences in the inspection reports, inspection outcome. We have to establish some way of evaluating and working ourselves up, of identifying which are those differences and how can we work through them to get to the point where we can mutually rely.
I don't disagree. I guess ultimately I would say, are those differences meaningful to consumers? And I come back to comments from the senior leaders this morning who are saying, when I travel from Canada to the US, I buy products with confidence in the US because I know the FDA has done a good job of inspecting. People travel from the US to Canada, buy Canadian products with confidence without concerns of their safety. And so if the average citizen on the street has that level of confidence today, can the regulators not begin from that perspective as you look to work jointly?
If I may jump in, we are an evidence science-based organization. You have to establish evidence to say those are identical, rather than just hearsay. So I'll jump to what you just mentioned in terms of mutual recognition agreement, because we do have mutual recognition agreement with Europe, Canada has, and we went through an exercise, and it was a very, very onerous exercise of trying to establish exactly what the similarities are, what the differences are, and we have to maintain those. So if there is any slippage, we have to actually revisit those deficiencies. So it's an exercise that you have to build over, but I do see where you're coming from. And I'm absolutely, I'm certain that Carmelo will not disagree that if there is room where it doesn't make any sense to do duplicative inspections or ask for information, we will work together to make sure that it is not duplicative.
I also have just a comment, if you don't mind. Excuse me. I'm also a little confused about the scope and where you're going in terms of building. In lieu of these discussions, when this started last year, I was in the room when Dr. Lumpkin talked about mutual reliance, especially on GMP inspections, knowing that PAI and for cause were probably off the table for this round. That was one of the comments. But I'd also like to build on some comments that we've heard quite clearly from Deb Auteur over the last 4 or 5 years, especially the last 2 years. I know Deb's not there anymore, but the increasing need of your organization to go ahead and look at those well-established, very up to speed regulatory authorities in different countries and pursue mutual reliance, just for lots of reasons, especially because you're a global organization now and you have to spend resources on areas that require more resources. And so with Health Canada and obviously being a partner and well established in this field, I guess a lot of us in the room also thought that the goal here was not really leveraging and sharing information, but to get to the state of mutual reliance on GMP.
So let me just jump in for more broadly. I think what you're stating and what today, the earlier statements, would be the ideal.
Mm-hmm.
It will take one incident where the public health is not protected. And if we don't have that science criteria in place, it will be incredible. There will be a lot of people we're having to answer to. So I think we need to come at this from both sides. I mean, I think there's a commitment and a real recognition, more recently in FDA, but about the global nature of the work that and the complexity of our supply chain, and the need to really work much more proactively and actively with our foreign regulatory counterparts. But to do that, we need to, as Carmelo said, what's the baseline in which there's not just assumptions drawn. We really need to take the steps to really establish the baseline and the scientific criteria in which decisions would be made, because, again, as he also said, there will be times we're in a facility, Canada's in a facility, we may take different draw different conclusions and take different regulatory actions. That doesn't mean that you have to tease out, is it a difference in approach? Is it a difference in the science? Is it a difference in the day it was, the inspections, the inspectors that were there, et cetera? So all of these are just a multiplicity of factors that need to really be teased out. But I think what you're hearing from us within this RCC framework is that there is truly a commitment to try to work together and better understand our respective systems, and where the extent possible, wherever the extent possible, begin to really kind of work together so that we can better expand that safety net and ensure that we're using kind of making the decisions based on risks, based on information that we're receiving from our counterparts.
How long do you think this is going to take? Because it feels like we're losing the spirit of RCC. We're creating more red tape than reducing, which is part of the federal government. If you look at it from our side of it, it's like 2 inspections instead of 1. So this could take forever.
So
it just feels like we're creating more red tape because it's assuming that obviously we can't recognize each other, that there's some sort of big risk out there.
So I'll let you guys focus on the number of inspections, but I do have a broader answer for you.
Yeah, one important aspect, when you see what's written on the RCC, it seems more easier than what it is. There's a lot of complexity to the process. It just, when you hear the word mutual reliance, people think that that's an easy process to get to. And I'll give you an example. We've been dealing with Europe in many fronts, and we're still not at that point. And there's multiple inspections that are conducted. There's joint inspections. There's a process of building that relationship where we can get to that mutual reliance that we want. That we're there yet, maybe not. That we can get there, perhaps. I certainly am optimistic that that possibility is there.
Let me just answer it more broadly, though. I think that, speaking for FDA, we're part of 6 working groups out of the 29 under this rubric. We selected or worked with our Canadian counterparts to select working groups that would be sustainable over time and could literally be integrated over time to our workflows and processes. Before we had RCC in the last administration, we had SPP. And these all have beginnings and ends. And I think one of the things that we thought about very carefully is how to begin a process and then build on that over time and really begin to continue that momentum and that commitment toward a much more integrated approach to the work that we do. So it's, it's not to say we're going to do something in 2 years. That sounds great, but I think sometimes when you start even barely scratching the surface, you're going to see things be much more complicated and take more than 2 years. And that doesn't mean it's a failure. It means that it really, I think, recognizes the commitment on both parties to work through to what are really meaningful, substantive, measurable outcomes that are sustainable over time. I know we've had it and people are passing it around, but he's been waiting for a question. So if we could just move the mic over for him.
Yes.
Just please, he's been terribly patient.
I suspect folks can hear me. I'm Tom Morrison, I'm with Dun Bradstreet. And I have 2 comments. First of all, trust begins slowly. And the level of interactions between HC and FDA have been really impressive, and that's the stuff of trust. And that gets to sustainability, so kudos. It's a slow process. I have 2 comments, and they both deal with trust and moving faster. If you invite industry in to help you deal with the challenges of IT, and we know what those challenges are, you may be surprised at what can be done at little to no expense under the guise of collaboration. And suddenly those challenges become a little more manageable. Secondly, trust is also aided by the exchange of information. So transparent societies tend to engender a little more trust between governments and people. Similarly, there's a treasure trove of data that can be shared between the FDA and HC right now. So inspection information, I'm not talking about the raw content, but the metadata profile or attributes of data sets that are as inclusive as warning letters, consent decrees, as Carmelo referenced, adverse events filings, registration listing information, licensing information. We know all the data sets. We know industry. We know how to help you handshake and exchange that information. And that will help, I think, add to the transparency work that's so important here and establish that trust. It won't immediately avoid things like two inspections where maybe one is appropriate, but certainly over time it starts to alleviate or separate out the good actors from the bad actors, and it's another way of looking at the problem. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? Because you used a data byte of 160,000? Is that?
That's not correct.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure that I don't know what the correct number is, but that just seemed large to me.
That's not correct.
Okay.
It's okay.
I just wanted, I went, whoa, and I just wanted to be sure that, do you know what a better ballpark would be?
That, if you're comfortable, so we're a vendor to
Oh, well, I
FDA,
have no
and
idea, so
I
if-
would rather not
Okay.
talk about what we know.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Beth?
Yes.
Just another quick clarification that I'm, very interested to hear in what, industry's possible assistance with again, some of the IT and some of the logistics issues that we are having. And I know somebody mentioned that, this is 4 inspections. That's nothing. It's hardly anything. And again, like the first entire portion of this process was that learning mode, getting signed that framework, how you operate, how we operate, how are we going to exchange this, X, Y, Z. But one of the issues, and again, this is where the tools could really come into place, is when we're dealing with scheduling of inspections and these sites of common interest. This is where this common information really needs to be. It's a painstaking process to say, okay, where are you going in the next number of months, and where are we going, and do we both need to cover the same thing or the same building or the same process or the same product, whether it's overseas for us or domestic for us. That's 2 different processes, 2 different sets of people, and we're finding the same issues. So to try and align all of those processes to get to the same place at the same time on purpose, can again, without, all done largely by email and with very little concrete data systems to assist with, it's a struggle. But as we figure out those processes, and as we figure out, again, this goes to the process and the content and the IT all kind of coming together, that will speed up. Again, like getting those first 2 done was very painful, just organizing them. And then the second 2, it was a simpler process. And I would think that if we were to continue to do that, again, we've got that process down, and then could only be assisted by some higher level IT and platform issues.
Just to add to that, just for the benefit of this room, is that Beth has her regular job. RCC is over and above her regular job. Same thing for our resources. It's a very, very intensive process to even have come to those 4 observational inspections, to align the activity and the inspectors in the absence of having those common databases, and be able to go and say, okay, I can see the same thing as you can and the same set of data. It has been a challenge. And I completely understand where industry is coming from and saying, okay, how long do I have to wait before I can actually see the benefit of this? It has to start somewhere. It has started. I think maybe we can celebrate that it has started, and it'll happen. It'll happen quite fast, because I think it'll happen in leaps and bounds in terms of the IT. Once the IT happens, I think that we will be there.
Beth? 3 more questions, and we'll wrap it up.
I was just going to say, because actually I was going to mention it before the gentleman did, don't forget that industry wants this to happen, and so therefore we are the biggest supporters of trying to share whatever experiences, data, even perceptions perhaps, in terms of how the FDA and how Health Canada even do their inspections, not just the hard data, but even the softer data. So we are a treasure trove of information in its general sense. And I think that perhaps that is where, as a recommendation, that might be an area where you might look into in terms of expediting, not complicating, but expediting perhaps some of the challenges that you have right now or have exhibited, or have found as you move through it. So even from a Canadian perspective, it's the same thing. We're there.
Thank you, Loretta. That's a very useful comment, yeah.
So we had question here, Robert, please. The mic is coming.
Robert White, CHP Canada. I think I might try to express why an industry, at least the Canadian industry, is so frustrated. It's because Health Canada has done a great job on MRAs before, and they did it within 2 years. We talk about the EU was about 2 years, but that was every country within the EU. We've done it also with EFTA, which is the European Free Trade Association, which is 4 countries. We've done it with Switzerland, which is 3 or 4 groups in Switzerland. We've done it with Australia. And each of those actually was done in approximately 2 years or less. So I think Health Canada has done a good job. Now we're saying, so now we're going to the U.S., which is our closest trading partner, and which we should know probably the most about. And yet here we're a year and a half, almost 2 years into the process, and we don't have an end point in sight.
I'll take the compliment. The first half of your
I'll take the compliment.
To address the second half is that I think even Bob in the morning did say that, and the other presenters in their presentation, the actual work started a little bit late, even though the project itself was initiated quite early. It has been slow. Due to many, many different reasons, is that we all have our day jobs, and this is over and above the other stuff that we do. So we have to continue to maintain what we currently do and then try out something new. And then we have to maintain both of them until such time that we have actually closed this project. So, Carmelo, you want to add something?
No, I'm happy to hear of all those success stories. But again, in terms of what we're doing, I can assure you that FDA is working very diligently with Health Canada in making things happen. There's different processes. There's a lot of opportunities for improvement, certainly. But I think what I have to say to just end my comment is that we make decisions based on the information that we have. And I'll give you just one quick example. If you look at the number of warning letters and actions that we've taken throughout the different years, the way the evidence is collected, the way that we make those decisions is totally different to the way that Health Canada approaches, because their system is different. And again, we have to work our way to understand in order to be able to get to the point where everyone is interested in mutually relying. We're comparing outcomes, we're comparing inspections, we're comparing, and we're seeing some significant differences. Seeing those significant differences at this point, should we just ignore them? We can't. We have to work our process to see how we can get to the point where we can mutually rely. And I think that's a core point to the discussion. We're finding some differences, and we need to see how we can resolve them and get to the point. But otherwise, we just can't close our eyes and ignore them, which is even a bigger challenge for us as regulators.
I think we had one more question. Did we? No? Okay.
Did you not?
Did you not?
You had
Just one perspective, and I'll just share just one perspective to just keep in mind of, we have plants in Canada that make products for both U.S. and Canadian citizens, and we continue to have inspections 2 weeks apart. So the amount of time that you're both spending and the amount of angst that we go through to prepare for those inspections is still double, but the outcomes are still always the same.
Thank you. Well, that's a great, so we've heard 3 very distinct presentations, and we've had Q&As following each one of them, but just to open it to the group now, if you had any more general comments or questions in terms of this initiative broadly. I can tell you from a Health Canada perspective that we certainly, RCC is a priority. That's true that it is, that you have to do it in addition to your regular work, but we have put the time and energy on RCC. We're a small organization compared to the US, and we have been successful in implementing and making lots of progress and great success on this initiative because we are committed to this initiative, and we really think that this has allowed to deepen the relationship between the FDA and Health Canada, which is already a very good relationship. And as you all know, we collaborate in multilateral forums such like ICH and have adopted all the ICH guidance, have greatly contributed, and in many others organizations. But if you have good suggestions for the future, and if you have ideas of what could be RCC and what kind of mechanism we could put in place rather to institutionalize and deepen even more the relationship. Through the summer, you will be consulted through the Federal Register and through our gazetting process. And so I invite you to make all your comments and suggestions and, be creative. We're looking certainly for ideas. That would be certainly my conclusion. Lou, please.
I mean, we also, I think, are committed to the RCC process, and frankly, we're committed to really. There's a lot of thinking going on about FDA as a regulatory agency within a global context. This means new thinking for us on a whole lot of levels. To your point, that's like, duh, why would somebody want to go in 2 weeks, in between? But it tells you that our thinking isn't there yet. And this idea of just exchanging these lists and then we find out they're not as easy and, what are the IT platforms or systems that we may need to have in place that would really expedite and almost make it kind of like at the same time. I mean, there's no reason why so much of this stuff isn't real-time information, in terms of inspectional scheduling at least or whatever. But I also so we're this is thinking that's going on at every one of our product centers. It's going on in the commissioner's office. But like any other new thing, it's 2 steps forward and 3 steps back sometimes. And so, but I will say that the commitment is really there at all levels within the agency. It's been quite amazing. And, the other thing that, so I think, as you've said, the person behind you, if we couldn't do it with Canada, who can we do it? Because so many of the other folks and regulators that we're dealing with really have much more diverse differences, and we're dealing, in culture and language and everything else. So this really affords both the United States and Canada a really incredible opportunity. So, our commitment's there. We'll plow through this, and we need to hear from you, and want to work with you. And those of you that said, we can help you solve this problem. That's music to our ears. And so, but I think we're all in this together. It's not. We're in this together, so thank you.
So you had one more final
I
comment?
just wanted to bring to the table the comment that I was mentioning to you, Louise, about communication and maybe even consultation and pre-consultation. There may be reasons why in US or Canada, there's reasons why the consultations or the information sharing with the RCC is limited to certain dates or certain milestones, and we can all appreciate political sides of things, et cetera. But one of the things that, at least from a Canadian perspective, we've learned, and I think we've really seen positive results, is this really pre-consultation and really trying to flush out what the stakeholders have as issues, and then moving forward, really having that interaction as everything starts to happen. I don't think it's just me, but there's been long periods of silence, and that is something that causes consternation and at the same time can cause disengagement, which is something that we don't want to happen. So just another recommendation perhaps about looking in terms of the transparency and the communication around great advancements in some cases and challenges, so that maybe solutions can be brought to the table faster.
thank you for your comment.
Thank you
So,
all.
thank you all.
Yeah, I have to go to the next one.
Okay.
I have to do foods.
Thank you, Lou. I think we did
Well, yes, thank you. And so on the now government.
Anytime.